Hey everybody, welcome to Facebook Live on the Janome website. We are sharing awesome tips for Janome, things that you can do with your machines and how you can improve your process. So welcome to my home studio. My name is Kate Quinn. Can you give me a thumbs up or a like if you can hear my voice and everything sounds good to you? I am using my headset, so I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. We'll give everybody just a second or two to go ahead and acquire the broadcast, go ahead and participate with us. So I'll wait just a moment. So in case you're not familiar with me, I am a quilter. That is the predominant type of sewing that I do. I have loved it. I've been sewing about 30 years, and education wasn't as terrific back in the day as it is now. So it's really great that we have a lot of people sharing amazing tips and tricks that can really help your process. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that you can do to make binding my machine easier and make it look really good. Darlene, thank you so much for letting me know that you can hear me. I appreciate that. So this is my studio. We're sewing today on the CM17. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the camera and show you what we're going to be working on. So give me just a sec. All right, let's get us flipped here. I have to scoot this over just a second. There we go. All right, let me just get adjusted real quick and I'll give you a nice view. Let's go ahead and start with the machine setup. So let you see both the machine and the screen there. All right, so I just threaded my needle. I went ahead and I am using my quilting needle. All right, these are the Janome purple tip needles. We are going to be putting our binding on, but I would assume that if I've already quilted it and I go ahead and I start putting my binding on, if I have a quilting needle, I would just leave it on, right? So don't change it if you've already got the correct needle, but if you don't, we're going through a lot of layers, so it is really useful. So I just went ahead and changed my needle and threaded it, so I'm going to turn this off. Now, on the screen here, we have a lot of choices. How many people have ever done binding and then you try to flip it over to the other side and it won't go? You're having to like torque it and force it and the binding crunches up and everything like that. It drives me insane. So what I want to show you is how we can get a really nice flip. And it does take a little bit more time, but it's totally worth it so that I can sew it by machine. So I'm going to show you what this will look like. So this one is got a little bit of a top stitch, and I can change the needle position if I want to, right? Can you see that? It's a big stitch. That was a test, so that's on about 5 millimeters, but this would be top stitching it. And we're finishing the whole thing by machine. So when you look at it on the back, right, that's the back right there. So we're going to show you how to do that. And you have to do that before you start sewing. And then I'm going to show you how to close your tails perfectly so that you'll get a super nice flat binding. Okay, so let me show you a couple things about our awesome Janome feet before we start. So two different options I'm going to show you. I think I have one more. And let's go ahead and we'll go to the screen. So I want to show you on here, I'm going to be working in the quilting area. Okay, quilting under the scroll and quilting. And I'm going to mostly be using this P1. And if you don't have P1, you can still use this. You just need to be able to adjust your needle position. That's really the big thing. So down under these settings, 4.5 is center needle position on a 9 millimeter foot. So this would mean the needle would be in the center of the foot. And here my stitch for quilting for patchwork is typically 1.8. If I'm doing binding, I would probably want it like 2.4. You can make it whatever you want, it's your call. But when I'm putting the binding on, I generally put it on just a little bit bigger. I don't use it at such a tight stitch because there's a lot of layers going in there. When we test it and we do the sample, we want the stitch to be very long because if it's not correct, we need to be able to pull it out. So while we're testing to find our proper flip dimension of our seam, how wide that is going to be, we're going to use 5. And then once we've figured it out and we have the right thickness of how wide our seam is, then we'll just put it back to the regular setting. So this is the adjustment that we'll predominantly be doing. All right, let's come in a little closer to the machine and show you some of these feet here and why one foot might be a better fit than another one. So the binding that I'm going to be using today when I actually sew my project is 2.5. That means that it was cut at 2.5, but this one is not. This one is only 2.25. Okay, this is a 2.5-inch mark, and you can see this is 2.25. It's not all the way. It should be right to that middle, but it's got that fold. Okay, so just so you know, this one's 2.25. Now this one is cut at 3, so it's quite wide. This was typically the cut that you want to use when you're doing a 1/2-inch binding. So this one will be closer to 1/4. This one will be 1/2, and the one that I'm doing 2.5 that's cut this width will end up being about 3/8 inch wide. Okay, so when we're putting it on, each of our quilt sandwiches have different thicknesses. So a lot of times when you put your binding on, if my binding is going on a batting that's twice as thick as this, then I can't just accept that I just put it on there and sew it at 1/4 inch, right? Because the flip will be different. How much space the batting takes up will change. So I think it's worth taking just a little bit of extra time to ensure a proper fit, okay? Let's show you on this foot really quickly. I'm going to just line this up right against the foot. Let's see if you can see it well. So if I line this up and my needle is in the middle, the center position where the needle is in the center is 3/8 from the edge of this A foot. It's 3/8 from here right to the center position. So as I told you on the project that I'm going to be doing, for showing you how to close your tails, we're going to be doing 3/8. So I'm going to be using this foot because this is already very close with the needle in the center, right to the width of the binding that I want to have. So making sure that you know your tools and what information they can share with you is really powerful. So this is the A foot. So from this edge to the center needle position is 3/8 inch. And I'm going to be using that position, which is 4.5 millimeters. And then I'll adjust from that position to get my perfect flip. So this is what we'll use for the project. If I have some other bindings, I wanted to just share that you have other options. If I'm doing this at 2.25, this is very, do I have the wrong foot? Oh, that's the wrong foot. We need this one, the O foot. Okay, this is our Janome 1/4 inch. It has an easy edge guide that I can ride my fabric right up against. When I'm using that 2.25, the stitch is very close to 1/4 inch to sew that seam and get a decent flip. And if I use this foot, well, it's already there, right? If I need to make it a little bit narrower than that for some reason, like if my batting's really thick, I wouldn't probably be able to use this foot because I can't go that way. I can't make it narrower, but if this works, this is a really good foot to use for 1/4 inch. Okay, so we've shown you these two. This is the A foot and the O foot, and this is the AD foot, and I have it with the open setting right here. This makes it really easy to line up. If I have those little samples right here, see that this is marked right at the 1/2 inch mark. I actually marked it with a ruler. And let me just show you, if I lay the edge of this foot right along it like that, look at how my needle position is pretty much right in the center already. Let's see if I can make that a little bigger for you, right? So if I use the very edge here and I ride my quilt right along the edge here, then I can use this and I can move the needle a little bit in so I have more flip, or a little bit over so I have less flip. So I can get the perfect measurement to make sure that that fits. So this one, with the needle being right in the center of the 1/2 inch, this is great if you're working with these thicker bindings where you have a 1/2 of an inch. You can still use this also, but what I'm looking for is I want something that I can easily ride the quilt along the edge, that I don't have to think about it or do a lot of complicated measuring. So just by measuring the edge of the quilt right along the foot, I can easily do my 3/8 with this foot, and I can do my half with this foot, and I can do my 1/4 inch seam with this foot. So that's why one of these might be a better choice than the other. Okay, so we said we're going to use this one. I'm going to show you how we test that flip now. Okay, so I got my foot on, double check, and I'm already threaded up. I actually have a matching thread in here to the quilt. That doesn't matter so much when you're putting on the binding, but it matters more when I'm doing the stitching to close everything. All right, so I went ahead and I have this, let's see, let's pull it over. This is my excess. I went ahead and I tested quickly to line it up so that no fold like this will end up right at the corners, right? So I have already pre-positioned everything and aligned it, and here is my start position. If I start from this, then I won't have any binding issues. Okay, so I did already test this a little bit, but I'll show you how it is. And I've also got, this is Janome's awesome guide. Oh, I think my thing is not tight. Let me get you all tightened up. You don't want anything moving around. So Celine just showed this on a video recently that this can lock into place, and you're using the red line to line that up. So once I get this aligned right on the edge of the foot, because we said that's what we want to use, I don't want to start that close. So that's why I have this pin here. I'm going to move it up a little bit. And let's come back out so you can get more of a view. All right. So the cloth setter lets me go ahead and get a little bit more of a guide if I want to use that. So this can help me if I want to keep everything lined up. But we said that we're using the foot. And so the first thing I want to do is get it lined up on the foot, and then I can just bring this over. And that way the seam can be a little straight further out. I get more coverage, more guidance. So then I'll lock it in place. I don't want to push it too tight, and then just go like that, and then it shouldn't move at all. So now I have a nice edge guide for myself, and I'm going to put it up, as I said, it's at 5 millimeters. So when I test it right now, I'm also going to be at 5.5. That's the needle position that I found works for this quilt. It's based on how thick this batting is and how much I want this to turn over. So I'm going to sew a little bit just so you can see what that'll look like. So it's a very large stitch because I might have to pull it out in case it's not the right flip. And I'll sew maybe 2 or 3 inches. We need enough that we can actually test the flip. Okay. If my fabric here is snow plowing out in front of my needle like this, buckling, then what I would want to do is lower the amount of pressure that the presser foot is pushing down on. So if you see that this is kind of buckling in here, I can make the foot push down less, and that would give me a little bit more freedom as I'm sewing this. So let's just cut this. So we have super clean edge guide as we're going. This was just to mark so I wouldn't lose my place there. Okay, so let's test it. So do we have enough room to flip this over so that the edge right here will just cover up this stitching? Okay, so let's test it. So let me show you real quick. There is the edge under there. We don't want a giant amount to cover this. We want to just cover it. So if it's too much coverage, that's what I mean by testing. So we could make the needle a little closer to the edge. Right now, mine is at 5.5, and I think that that might be a little too much, right? So let me just pinch it right there. See how much that's coming over? I want it a little closer, but you get to decide, right? You can decide how much you want. That's why I think it's important that you take a little time and test it. So if I move the needle to a different position, now remember, this is just a basting stitch. So if I need to take it out, super easy, just clip a few threads and then it'll be easy to pull it out. Okay. So right there, that's just a really nice big basting stitch on there. So I'll go ahead and snip a couple of those just so they'll come out. You want to see, I'm getting under here. The stitch is really loose. That way I can test it. And then say we want it a little bit of a tighter fit. There's this sweet spot in here where it could be too tight versus just perfect. So I've moved it up to 6 millimeters and I'll line it up again against the foot. If you need to pin, you can pin on this side, right? The cloth guide would make it so that pins would butt against that, but if you feel like you need any pins, you can put them this way with the head on this side and the point that way, and as you're sewing, you could just pull them out. Okay, so let's test it one more time. Pretty sure this is my perfect fit because I did test this earlier, but just wanted to let you see the process. Okay, so we're still on 5 millimeters. Okay, just cut it. The reason that I think this lesson is powerful is we don't have to just accept it, right? So you can see that's a little bit further in than the other one, right? Because there was the other one right there, you could see it. So let's check the back. Let's see how our flip goes. And I don't want to have to fight with it either, right? I want it to just flip. If I can't make this flip nicely, then it's too tight. So I think that's good. This is 6 millimeters, and this is a 2.5-inch binding strip. And that I think is a good, nice fit so that I can stitch this down by machine. Another note is that this is the front of the machine, obviously, the front of the project, right? This is the top. So I'm sewing this on to the top and I'll flip it to the back and I'm going to use my stitch in the ditch foot to ditch it. This edge has to flip over this stitching so that it will be captured. If it is just right to the very edge and not over a little bit, it won't be caught. So we do need to make sure that our flip comes just over this stitching. It should fully cover that so that we can have a nice flip. All right. So we decided that this is good. What's the first thing now that I got to do? If this is our good flip, I am so bad at this. I have messed it up so many times. I'm like, okay, it's perfect. Let's start sewing, right? But we are at 5.5 millimeters. So if I just start sewing like that right now, that is a way too big of a stitch length. So let's go ahead and put it back to a normal stitch length. If you'll remember earlier, I mentioned that 1.8 is the piecing patchwork length for stitching, which is a great length for that. It keeps those nice and sturdy. But I want probably about 2.4 while I'm sewing on this binding. Okay, now here is the thing, right? We are about at the corner right here. So we moved our needle over. It's difficult then to use the guidings that are on the foot or on the plate because our needle position is in some odd position. So as I get close down here, I want to use just some simple marking. This has the diagonal right on it, right there. And I'm going to use that and make the 45-degree reference line. So I would line it up like this, and I'm going to mark right there so that I can have a really visible mark so that when my needle gets to it, I can get a very precise stopping point. So I'm going to go ahead and mark it. Whatever you mark, use chalk or quilt safe marking. Make sure that you can see it as the needle is sewing down. So can you see my white line? It's nice and visible. Let's see if I got it perfectly to the corner. Looks pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to come back to where we started. If I want to take those basting stitches out, I can. I usually do, but they will be hidden. So, if you don't want to, once you get your perfect flip, they should be just sewn right over that. So here we go. All right, so we're sewing down until our needle's touching. And don't try to be in a hurry. And also, if you use the cloth guide, remember that you're looking here. Try not to let this roll up the guide, right? We just wanted to touch it gently, not super tight. Because I have the camera in the way, I'm gonna have to like stand up and look over it, make sure I get my needle in the right spot. We're trying to get the needle right in the chalk line. Okay, so I'm trying to be super careful. On this machine, I have this flywheel right here that I could use if I need to. Super, super helpful. Also, right now, I'm at the chalk. I can see that my needle is right in it. I think so. Okay, and now I'm just going to stitch backwards a few stitches and let the machine just secure that so that just about 3. Go ahead and cut it with your scissors if you want to. All right, so I'll show you where we're at. Okay, right there. Let's see if we can get a little more light on this real quick so you can see better. Okay, we stitched right up to our chalk line. And that same tool that I showed you before, I love this also. If I lay it right on the corner, I'm just going to have to pull this extra up a little bit. I can see right away if I'm aligned. I can use this diagonal right there, put it right on the corner, and then I can just align that so that this is perfectly lined up the way it's supposed to be. So right here, it's right on the line. And then I usually will flip it over while I'm holding that so that I can get a nice tight fit right there, and then just kind of slide that out of there. Okay, so I'll set that to the side. I'm going to line up the corner here. We have to turn directions, get it all lined up, and I usually will put a pin right there just to hold things so that if I'm fumbling around or something like that, that it's not going to go crazy. This is away from the foot. The foot's going to line up here, and there's enough room for the whole foot, so this won't be in the way of my stitch. I also don't want it in the way. Oh, I bumped my cloth guide, darn it. Okay, that's okay. I must not have tightened it all the way down, or I must have bumped it. Remember that we're using this as the guide, so start with that first. Okay, I want my needle to just come up on the fabric, and then line this up so that your fabric is nice and smooth against the guide, and then tighten it up. Okay, so one of the things that I hate is on the big quilt, it's hard sometimes because you have a lot of bulky fabric, right? So one of the things you want to do is don't rush, okay? So see right here, we have a little bit of buildup. I'm going to lower the presser foot pressure to about 4. And now as I sew, you'll see that we probably won't have that happening nearly as much, right? See how this can now just feed naturally? Okay, and then if I need to smooth things up, I'll just keep doing that. Maybe one more. Okay, and I'm going to smooth this a little bit. I'm going to need to make my mark. I'm almost at the corner here. So I'm going to go ahead and make another mark, just the same way that we did it before. You're putting the tip and this diagonal line on that side of the quilt. And even the cloth guide right there is helping us get right to the tip, right? So we don't put it too far, stuff like that. So I'm just going to lay it on there, try to get it nice and straight, make sure that I have no extra fabric in there, and then mark that. Oh, I didn't get a good mark. I need more chalk. All right, let's see if I can make it a little stronger of a line. I want you to be able to see it on the camera as well. So a fine marker is better, right? We want to get pretty accurate right there to that line. So if you're using a really fat marker, that's not as helpful. Somebody just asked, is this a 2.5-inch ruler? Yes, this is the OmniGrid. I call this the binding powerhouse. This is my binding helper. Any ruler will do. This one is just nice and small, and you're working in a small area. And even for the 3-inch binding, since it's folded in half, this is perfect for any of those binding sizes. All right, so let's go ahead and sew further down to our line. Okay. Oh, this is getting a little too tight right there. You see that? He's kind of right on the edge of the cloth guide, so I'm just gonna let him have a little bit more space. I'm looking for my chalk. Oh, did I lose my thread? I sure did. Look at that. I'm sewing through the camera and I can't even see that. Let's go ahead and get threaded up. Oh my goodness. I pulled out, I guess, when I was doing all that shenanigans over there. I'll go ahead and thread it up, and I'm going to give you another tip. I recommend that when you're doing binding that you use cotton thread. It's not as slick or slippery, and so it's very, very useful, I think, because it kind of has a little friction and it sticks. All right, well, we're back at the beginning here. Oh, you know how it is, right? It's always like this on camera. So let's make sure I can get my first stitch anchored, and I'm going to bring this over just a little bit. I need him to be a little tighter that way. Okay, so we've locked our cloth guide. We're right on the end, and let's make sure our first stitch or two is doing good since I just had it pop out. Oh, much nicer now. Okay. All right, and then just as we go along, I'm just gonna feel right here, make sure that the cloth setter is not rolling. I usually have a finger guide right here. As the fabric is feeding under me, I can use this kind of as my guide right there and just make sure that everything stays right along the edge like I want. So we were talking about bulky quilts and how important it is that we don't go fast, right? The idea is we're trying to set this up as a perfect flip so that when we are using the backside and stitching that over, that we can flip this very, very precisely. So that means that speed is not our goal. We're looking for precision. So I'm just going to keep smoothing this down just a little bit. And I'll probably have to check that corner alignment before I do this, just because it wasn't sewn in. So let's just double check it. Okay, got it lined right up. And I'm going to mark it again just in case. Okay, so I can see it. Hopefully you can too. I'm going to sew right until my needle is in that chalk line. That's one of the important things about using the foot that has a view here. Let's get in just a little bit tighter. Let's see if we can get this camera a little closer. So Lily, you asked about the size of the little square ruler. It's only a 2.5 inch square, right? It's very small, 2.5 inches, 1, 2.5. And it does have the diagonal in the center. That's really important because we need that. So let's get a little closer. If my foot cannot easily view that chalk line, then it's not that helpful. Okay, so right now I can actually see through this clear plastic and I can see that my needle is right in my chalk line. And just like we did before, we just want to reinforce that a tiny bit. So I'm just going to go backwards 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, cut it. I'm having challenges here. I'm not sure what happened with my thread. I'm going to rethread it from the top because it actually didn't do it. It's so bright in here with the camera that I think I'm having trouble with my visibility of my own personal self. Okay, I'm locked up. I'm getting threaded here. I'm in the take up lever. All right, and I'm actually going to just grab something really quick and do a little test stitch on here to make sure that everything is working good, right? I don't want any more trouble. All right. All right, you guys can be the judge. It's sewed. Okay, I'm not sure what I did. I must be flaking. All right, so now I want to sew faster because now I'm nervous, right? That it didn't work twice. I'm going to bring my foot in just a little bit so that it's not quite right on the edge, but I'm inside the stitching, right? Just to make sure that I can get that initial stitch, and we'll go ahead and do a little tack here to make sure it'll sew in really well. All right, don't panic. I know I want to panic, but that's okay. This is what happens in every sewing room, right? You think that it's going this way, but it's doing something else. All right, so let's go ahead and adjust our position here, make sure we're all nice and smooth. All right, again, looking right now, making sure that I'm getting right to my chalk. So I kind of slow down as I'm getting into the chalk line because I don't want to overshoot it. That would mean I'd have to pull it out. I'm going to just go ahead right now. We'll stitch backwards. It's definitely sewing. It looks good. And then 1, 2, 3, backwards to cut. All right, so same thing. We have our little 1/4 inch from the edge, right? We used our diagonal. I'll put that on there. And now we'll flip it one more time and use it right on the corner. So I'll show you, I'm lining it up. Let's just come down a little bit so you can see better. And I'll put some light on it as well so you can see. Okay, so we can even move this out of the way. We can reset it later. Okay, lay this right on the corner, just like this. And you're checking this diagonal line right there. And if it's not right on the diagonal, just give it a little tug. Okay, so now it's right on the diagonal. Maybe a little bit more. Everybody's got their own eyeballs, right? And then just flip it over gently, holding that in place. We want to get that nice alignment right on the corner, getting all of our edges lined up. So if it's a little too full right there, I can just smooth it out a little bit and put that pin in. Okay, remember the pin now is holding that corner, but it's out of the way. So when we put the cloth setter on and we're sewing, that'll be out of my way. So the first thing we want to do is we're inside a little bit, right? We want those first stitches actually in the fabric. So I'm aligning my needle. And let's make sure. Okay, yeah, good. And then scoop this over. So the edge of the foot is the alignment guide. So I check that first, then I can scoot this into place. Pretty easy, right? I just lock it down just by touching right here. I love how easy that is to use. So fabulous. Okay, let's sew. I am standing and sewing because I can't really see over the edge there of the camera. So make sure that everybody feeds. So like right now, if my quilt is really bulky, let's kind of come in a little bit. If you have a lot of bulk out on this side, you've got to manage it so that these feed together, right? You don't want this happening, like this is kind of bunching up like this and it's not going. Make sure they're all feeding together. So if your quilt is big, get that up in your lap, get it up on the supported surface. This has a really nice big area, so it's very, very useful, but you could see that that would torque, right, if there's bulk on this side that's pulling this down. Okay, all right, so let's sew a little bit more. I want to like put the speed control on because as I'm standing, I can tell it's harder for me to govern the speed. So I'm going to just put it down a little bit. That way I can push pedal to the metal, right? Okay, that's a little too fast. There we go, just a little bit. So look, I want to show you this right here. Let me make this a little bit bigger, right? I'm going to make this more visible. I'm going to draw it in. This is my seam right here. This is my binding seam, and the direction that it is going is like that, right? So out in front, it's higher, and away from the sewing machine on the further side, it's lower. Remember this because we're going to need this information in just a little bit when we do our binding tail. That's super powerful. We do always want our binding tails to match, right? We don't want one going one way and one going another way because then it looks awkward. All right, get my little cheater friend out. Hello, here he is. So just reinforcing this technique right here. I don't have any extra fullness. You can just kind of smooth that out with your finger so that there's no fluffy in there. We don't want anything extra. And we typically need to mark this a little further maybe because we need to be able to get in there with the marking tool, right? We can't have it be like right there because then it's hard to get the marking tool in there. All right, so there we go. And I'm just gonna sew right down to that, nice and slow. Slow down a little bit right as you get there so that you don't overshoot it. Okay, I'm right at the chalk line, and then we'll go backwards. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I usually count so that I don't go over my chalk line, right? I don't want to sew past that. All right, we have 2 more corners. We'll try to do these quickly. This is a small piece, but this really does show you the real deal, okay? All right, so once again, I'm lining it right up on the corner, and if it's too much, just kind of lift it up, pull it back so that there's extra on that side, and then slowly pull that so that you're right on the diagonal. And you can pull up or down. It depends on where you need it. Like if it's over on this side, too far over, I would pull more on the back. And if it's too far over on this side, you pull a little bit that way, just so you can get that perfect alignment right there. Okay, so I've got it in place. Flip it over and just line it up right to the corner, nice and neat. Let's go ahead and put a pin right in there. I'll show you one other trick sometimes. You know, when we look at sometimes at the corner like this, it might look perfect, but if you look at it like that and anything's hanging over, then you might want to tighten this up. So make sure to check both sides. That'll help you get this really nice, perfect flip right there. Okay, so let's flip it over. Get everybody lined up. And again, as I said, we'll just put a little bit of this so that the foot can grab, and let's see, it's telling me something. Oh, set to lock mode. I'm pushing the wrong button. I kept pushing it. It was the wrong button. I was trying to lower my foot and I was pressing the threading button. So the machine is definitely smarter than I am. Okay, so we're all lined up. Here we go. Okay. You can tell I put my Mario on hold, right? I'm not going quite as fast now. I love that this holds everything in place so I can be controlled. Now, before I get too far, let's add this last corner in. I want to make sure I have room to mark, so just lay that diagonal right on it. Tighten that up a little bit, and then we'll just mark right there. So it's important that I can see the mark. Depending on what color you're working with, make sure that whatever you use for marking, you can see it when it goes underneath the foot right there. Because we really want to make sure that we can get a very precise alignment. Now, let's say my one stitch would be over right now. Let's just pretend, okay? Then what I can do is I can actually lift up my needle, okay? And I can adjust to get myself right to where I want to so that my needle will go right in my chalk line, and then it will not stitch over. So a little micro adjusting can be really powerful because we're looking for precision always for this. So now we'll go backwards. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Cut. All right, now we are at the point where I want to sew about 2 inches. So let's go out a little bit and let's show you where we are overall. Okay, we need to look at a little bit bigger area. We want to connect these tails and make sure that they are very precisely going to fit. So I want to sew just enough here to get away from the corner. I don't want to have to deal with all of this flipping around. I want this to be all aligned here at the corner. So I'm only going to sew about 2 inches, and then we're going to work on this and getting these properly lined up so we can get a perfect measure. Okay. So same thing, use our little tool. I'm going to scoop this out of the way. So just kind of lay it on there. I'm not trying to get it perfect right away. I want to use the tool to make it perfect. So pull it up a little bit. And right there, it should be lined right up too. So that's also a good sign that if the edge of this right there is right along here, then we did a good job. All right, I'm just gonna make sure we're right at the tip. Grab a pin. I don't know where these pins are going after I take them out. Well, I guess they're still in there. All of a sudden I realized I didn't have positive pin control. Okay, so we'll sew down, and like I said, just enough, right? We don't want to sew down too much. Just like we did before, lining it right up on the foot and making sure that my needle is on the fabric, because the foot has to kind of climb up. That's kind of one of these things that these little buttons can do. Let me show you, right? We can press that button. We want to get this to line up right there. So see how that's holding this nice and flat because we're kind of on and off the fabric. What that does is it's a little bit of a self-leveling button, and it's going to help us. Oh, and see, I lost it already. It wasn't quite lined up perfectly, but I will. There we go. Okay, so we're right on the alignment here. Let's scoop this over. Since we already used it, we're only sewing like 2 inches. Could I do this without the cloth guide? Yes. Does it make it easier? Yes, especially if you have something that's bigger and you just need a little bit more visuals, things like that, or if you have trouble with the visuals yourself, like you can tell that I was struggling visually. So it's good to have that, right? So I'm just going to back tack this just a little bit so that this just won't pull out while we're working. Let's cut it. Okay, now I will take out these pins because we don't need them and they'll be in our way for a minute. Here is another reason that I like my awesome little guide. Okay, this was our starting tail, and we kind of want our seam to be somewhere in the middle. So this is actually pretty good of a position. I'm going to scoot this out of our way, right? We kind of want the seam to be somewhere in here. So if I work from this edge and I sew this in, we'll be somewhere in the middle. So first, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to secure this. Make sure there's no extra, right? Align it. Maybe put a couple of pins. Okay, we don't want that to, and don't make it too tight either. We want this to lay smooth and flat. So if you need an extra pin or two in there, totally fine to do that. This is now the edge that we are using, right? Because we know that this is the edge. Notice how these are not a diagonal or on a 45. This is just a flat edge. I find this easier. Some people already fold it. I don't want to do any extra math. If I measure from the flush cut edge, that is the most practical. So let's get in a little tighter so you can see a little better. And I'm just going to adjust the camera just a little bit so we can get a good view. Okay, so pull this. Now, I want to pull this back. And again, you don't want any extra in there. Okay, so see how I'm going to line these up? Fold this over, and you want a tight fit, a nice secure fit. So in fact, as I get this lined up, I'll show you. We can even go like this. I can put a pin right at the very edge. I can actually see where the other fabric is right there. Okay, so now this is nice and smooth and flat also with no extra fabric. Okay, so flip it over. Now, I told you that this piece is 2.5, right? See how they're butted up right to each other right there? Okay, this is where you measure, right here. If your fabric is a wonky, you could make this 1/8 mark, 1 tick mark tighter, right? If it has a lot of stretch or if it's biased, you can make it a little tighter. This is straight of the grain, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to lay it right up on the cut right there, and then I'll mark on this side. So what am I marking? This is exactly how much space that I will need in order to join these two tails. And this distance is the width of your binding. If your binding is 3 inches, then this is 3. And if your binding is 2 1/4, this would be 2 1/4. And mine is 2 1/2. And this little ruler is 2 1/2. And so I have marked it right there. And I'm actually going to cut on the inside of the chalk line because the outside, right, is away from the ruler. The inner line right there is the inside of the ruler. So let me scoot these over. Now, I would do this on my rotary mat with a straight ruler, blah, blah, blah. But just for today, we're going to cheat and we're going to do it right here on the camera. Okay, so I'm just going to cut that as carefully as I can. One of the things that's very important is you need this to be squared up. So like if this kind of goes off, you know, and this is not a 90-degree angle, then that makes trouble. So make sure you have a nice clean cut right there. Okay, okay, take these out. We're going to need these pins. I usually always keep 2 handy, and you'll see in just a minute why. So I'm just going to put these 1 on each side like that. And we need some space, right? That's why these are not secured all the way here, because we need a little room to work with. So let me show you real quick. We marked it over here. When we're looking at that on this, in this orientation on my left side, it's closer to my left hand, it's on the top, and the slant is going this way. So the slant would be going that way, and the slant would be going that way. Okay, so I'm just gonna mark that really quickly so you have the same visual that I do. Visually, we want the slant to go that way. Okay, and you can mark that on your quilt or you could just check it visually. I mean, I'm doing this because in the camera, we can't show you that other one at the same time, but this is the same orientation that we need to have. So let's go ahead and do it. Take this first piece and fold it down like this. Line up your edges. Right here, try to get right to the tip, right? Work it so you can get this right to the tip right there. Now, I don't want it right close to the edge. I'm going to scoot it up a little bit just to keep it out of the way. Checking everything, check my tip right there. And let's just put a pin to hold that, okay? And I kind of will make sure that it goes all the way in, right? We're going to press this to get a really beautiful strong line. Let's do this side. So if you're looking at it, this is the top of the binding and this one was folded down. Okay, so if this goes down, then this one has to go what? The opposite way. Opposite, opposite. So that one would have to go up. Now, we don't know. I'll be truthful with you. I don't know if I'm doing this correctly. I'm going to show you how we'll figure it out, right? I don't try to guess. Let's go ahead and press this really fast. I've got my portable pressing station right here. It's important that you take the extra time and press these little bits, right? Let's make this come out a little bit more. I need a very strong mark right there when I know where to sew. So don't cheat and just try to lay these together. Actually press them out so you can get a super, super sharp, clean seam. And in fact, I'll take the pin out now that it's kind of set and just really make sure that it has a really strong fold right there. So see right there? That's going to be what we're sewing against. So we want to know that we can see it visibly. So it needs to be a pretty strong press as we're working. In fact, I'll turn my iron up a little bit because I want it to be hot so it will make a good mark. Okay, so let me set this down for a second. Okay, so just for a minute, I don't want it to go too far. Let's scoop this over. And then again, just finger press that a little bit and we're going to put the iron on that. I think it is very tempting to not want to put the iron on these, right? And just kind of like go with it. Don't do that. Press them out. It gives you a much better alignment when you're working with these two pieces. Okay, so put the iron over there. Now, we can scoop this out of the way too. Let's test it. We want our angle to look like that. Okay. And right now we don't know if it will or not. We're going to find out here in just a second. Okay, I'm going to pin this because it should lay nice and flat. You can see that the angle, is that going the right way? I don't know, looks suspect. I don't think so. Okay, so what does that tell me? That tells me that I have done this correctly and the fit is nice. See how it fits beautifully? But my angle isn't the right way. So how do we fix that? So if you see that your angle is not going the way that you want it, then that means that these need to be reversed, right? So then I would take this and move it the other way. And I could have, pre-done this and given you the directions correctly, but then you don't necessarily know how to fix it, right? You want to make sure that you have the capability. So if it doesn't go the way you want it, literally you're just going to reverse your two triangles. Okay, so over here, this one was that way. So then I would just go like that. And again, I'm going to press these because as we said before, we want to make sure that these are perfectly lined up. That fold is your actual seam alignment. Okay, and I'm just going to torque that just a little because he doesn't seem like he's laying down just right. There we go. All right, so let's get our ironing board back up here. All right, and of course now we're pressing out the previous fold, right? Because we had them the wrong way. So, if you want to spritz that a little bit or whatever, I'm not going to for right now, but like if you put some steam on there, that might be good. Okay. So I'll show you that alignment one more time. It's worth going ahead and doing this pre-fold because if you look at it now, we line this right up, these two pieces. And I'm just going to pin it in place because we want to test that we have measured this correctly, right? So then take this part, line this up. This one will go underneath. And look at that. So right there, we have a perfect fit. So now what do? Right? Yeah, we fit it, but now we have to connect it. We're not going to try to just leave it like this, right? We need to actually sew these two pieces together. So let's show you that. Again, having two pins is very useful. I generally have two pins for this part of this process, and we'll probably need one more. Okay, these are going to be to connect these two, and I'm going to show you one more thing. Take these apart, and we're going to take these two edges, and we're just going to pinch them together like this. The purpose of this is we need more space, and this is making the two tails be very far apart, so we're just going to shorten that distance. And I usually shorten it to the back so that I have more working space. So we don't want this to come undone, so I'm going to kind of weave my pin in just to make that a little bit stronger right there. Okay, so let me show you. Here's our two little tails. Okay, that one. We'll try to get these aligned so there we go. So we want it like this, right? It can't be folded. They're not twisted. See how that just opens up? It's not twisted, it's just open. Okay, so put these two folded edges together and you'll see right here, this side's not, it's open, but it's not twisted. Okay, you just lay those two together, the diagonal where the fold was, and hello. Now we're just going to put those corners together and pin with those pins that we said we had right here, which are upside down, but they're right there. Now we need to sew right down the center line here. So I got to line up my corners very nicely, get all those edges very precisely lined up. I'm going to put the pin kind of far away because I want the foot to be able to sew down the middle. So I need the pins out of the way. Make sure that this corner is lined up. Okay. You can see how tight this is right here. That's why we don't have a lot of room. That's why we pinned this to give us more space. Okay, so I'm going to line up my other corner on this side as well. Make sure both of them are lined up and just make sure there's no buckling or anything else. These two should lay nice and flat right on each other. I think it's harder than it looks. Like doing it on camera makes it a little challenging, but you just want to make sure that this pin is not going to be in the way. Now, what's important is I want to show you a couple of things. I'm going to go to the screen right now because we need to adjust something. If our needle is going to ride right down this center line, it's more practical to use the center needle position, right? So we don't have to guess. So right now, our needle is not in the center. It's at our particular measurement that we used, right? So let me just show you. Oh, I love that we have so convenient, our double screen right here. So we're sewing with our needle at 6 millimeters. So the needle's over to the right, but the center needle position is 4.5. Oh, I guess I have to go this way. 4.5. So we're using the A foot and we're just going to put the needle in the center to sew this. But we have to remember that we had 6 millimeters before. Okay, so right now, 6 millimeters is what we have to go back to after we do this part. After we sew right down this line, getting these two pieces together, then we need to readjust back to our 6 millimeter position. This is the needle location, just to reinforce that. So right now, I got to put this thing underneath there. That's why I pinned all of that. So let me show you. It's a little bit of a jerry rig to get it under there. And if you had, this piece is very small. If we had a bigger piece, I could leave more slack. But given that it's so tiny and we just sewed 2 inches in from the corner, it just doesn't have a lot of space. So we're just gonna try to get this right under our needle, okay? It's not very bulky, but we wanna make sure that we can see. So I'm gonna put a little tick mark here. If I have trouble with the visuals, let's make it more visual so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, and if you needed to, you could also mark these. Like if your fabric is just not allowing you to see well enough, then go ahead and mark it so that you can. Make sure that you can see. So with this back piece, we don't want that bunkied up. I'm just going to twist this a little bit, get this out of here. And I'm lining up the edge right down here so that the corners are together. I'm going to use my needle right at the tip to position. Now, this is at 2.4. So I'm also going to change back to my narrower stitch, the 1.8, because I don't want the binding to be coming apart. Okay, so see how the pins are all the way out of the way. I'm sewing right down the diagonal. And if necessary, if you have any like little adjustments down here, you can use your stylus. You want to try to make sure you get right to the corner. Cut it. Now, before I trim anything, I'm going to take the pin right there out, open this back up. Okay. Woo, there we go. I was like, oh no, it didn't work. Yes, it did. So I got to take these pins out. Make sure you take those all out. All right. And before you cut anything, just tuck it in like that. Right? So it looks really good. If it's too loose for some reason, like if this was too loose, I would actually take it apart and start cutting at like 1/8, right? If this had a little bit of fluff, more than you wanted, where you felt like you couldn't sew it in, pretty easy to release this seam, actually release it, and just on one piece, cut 1/8, and then do the fold and everything all over again. It's better to have it be a little too big than a little too small, right? Because you don't want the quilt to be puckered up like that and stay that way forever. So what I like to do is check that, and if I need to make this a little tighter, it's worth it to get that precise fit. And you can see mine looks pretty good right there. Okay, so I would press this. I don't want a fold in there, so we'll give that a little happy juice. Make sure that it's pressed really good. So you can actually open this up, and if you're happy with it, I literally just come in here with the scissors. I don't try to be all fancy. Nobody's going to see that. It's going to get hidden. Okay, just cut that off. Smooth everything out, and let's get this pressed. It naturally wants to go this way, so I'm just going to let it go that way. And just make sure it's open on this side all the way. All right. So I do pin it when I'm doing this, because once we're done here, we want this to lay nice and flat and be evenly spaced. We don't want it to have a little bit more fullness right here where it's kind of like tucked up against that. See how that would be weird? So kind of straighten it out nice and flat, pin in the center of the open areas, right? Pin to the middle. Okay, then straighten that out and get this edge lined up, and then pin to the middle. And that keeps this from shifting any fullness to one side or the other where this is already tacked in and it can't move. We want to make sure that all the fullness is even. So now from here to here, we'll pin in the middle, kind of like evenly, straighten it out, get the edge right up to the tip, pin that. Okay, and then if you feel like it, you can press this, but generally speaking, I think that looks pretty good. What do you think? Are you happy with it? So if we pressed it, I bet it would lay a little bit flatter. I don't have any steam in my iron because I don't want that over here where we are working, but I'll put a little iron on it. Okay, and we'll get this little edge right there too. So there, what do you think? Does that look pretty good? All right, so let's sew. So what's the big deal? Right now, if I just start sewing, am I ready to go? What do you think? I need to do a little bit of an adjustment before I start sewing, right? I have to make sure that when I start, I'm at the right seam position. So we said 6, so I'm going back to 6. So my needle position has been moved over a little bit. So you can see it's not in the center. We were just in the center, and we're going to line this up right here on the edge. And then the other thing that we adjusted was the stitch length. It's 1.8. We are going back to 2.4. And see right now, everything looks like it's looking pretty flat. Let's make sure my needle, and we can go ahead and line this back up. Now, at this point, I don't want to take these pins out. I should have put them in on this side, but I'm going to just leave this off, and we're just going to finish this up. So right at the beginning, since we are starting and stopping, I'm going to go ahead and do a little tacking. Keep the edge right along. Okay. I don't want to sew over my pin, so when I get up close to it, I do like the pin to be actually, I'm just going to just tighten that up just a little bit like that. I want the pin actually up on underneath the foot, right? So just like we said, we want to make sure that there's no buckling. So before I take that out, I want that pin to hold the place. Okay, so get it up underneath there. Here we go. Okay, so it's up on top, and just kind of make sure that nothing is buckling. This is probably a little bit big. I probably would want it maybe slightly tighter. I'm overlapping my existing seam, so I'll do a little back tack here. All right, and we'll cut it. So what do you think? I should have pressed that a little better, but I think it's actually going to all press out. Now, this is the front of the quilt, right? The front piece. And I just want to show you a couple more things. I'll try to go really fast since I've already been talking for an hour. If you want to flip this over and sew it by machine, I recommend that you go ahead and secure your flip all the way. So I'll just show you real quick. Right? So the flip is right there. This will definitely cover. Let's get in a little closer because I can't hold it up in the air. There are a couple of ways where you can secure this, and I'm just going to do a tiny little piece right here just to show you. And I have one more cool foot that we can use. I won't do the whole thing because I have to like secure it. I actually like to use Roxanne glue based. It's water soluble glue. It looks like this, comes in this. And I would actually go around and dot this and secure the flip so that there's no pins. The purpose of that is that the pins would be on the wrong side, right? They'd be underneath. And so I wouldn't be able to control them as well. So I'm just going to use some Wonder Tape right now. This is water soluble tape. And I'm going to put it right up against the seam right there, because that's where we want to cover. We want our flip to cover that. So I'm just going to do a little bit just to show you this technique and how you can try it at home. Oh, I need to pull the sticky back off. So let me see. Right there. Whee! Okay. So now I want to secure it. So it is a little sticky. So let me show you. I just use use a stylus, something like that. We already know that this will flip pretty well because we did it very precisely. We measured everything, but you want this tucked under. Another thing that you can do is also if you do a woven over edge on your quilt, it'll help keep any edges from pulling up. So just want to go right over the stitching, right over it. Okay, so I'll show you before we finish. I've only got just this little section done. Okay. Right? So now I can put this side down, the bottom. Yeah, Karen, so I'm trying to do it by machine. So if I stitch and fold this right now and I don't have something to adhere this and double check the width, then it's going to look messy. And I can do it by machine, but I can't have the precision that I want. So that's why people sometimes do glues and things like that. I can stitch this by hand perfectly. I don't want to stitch it by hand, right? I want to use my machine. So I'm doing something that will allow the machine to make sure that this distance stays the same based on the flip, based on the stitching. Of course, there's many different ways to do it. This is a way to get a precision machine quilted binding finish. Okay, so now I'm going to show you something cool, right? This is deeper than this side, right? Because we covered up the stitching, so the back is deeper. Okay, now we need a tool. Dun, dun, dun. What is this special tool? This is the S foot. Stitch in the ditch foot. This little guide can go right in the ditch, but notice I can put the needle wherever I want to. So let's do that. Now, the stitch in the ditch foot is based on the center needle position, right? 4.5. So I'm going to still have my stitch be a little bit big for stitching in the ditch. It'll be maybe 2.6. This side is going to go down against the bed of the machine. Okay. This part is already stitched on and the glue or whatever you use on the back is holding it on the back. Okay. So right now, when I line this all up, I want to make sure that my needle is going to hit correctly, right? So I would check that, I test it. If it doesn't go in the ditch, then I would just move the needle over so that it will not. So it'll just kiss the edge as the needle hits. Why does it flip a little bit? Why isn't it right on at 4.5? Because this binding is kind of bulky, right? So that means that it may not be as perfect as if I was just stitching in a ditch where there's no bulk. So I think I got a good position right now. And let's just stitch down a little bit, keeping it in the ditch. And I can also top stitch. Right now the needle is riding right here in the ditch, but I could actually put the needle up on the binding, which would make the stitch move that way, and then that would give me more of a top stitch look. I did use a matching thread, and here is my stitch. Can you guys see that? Right there. Pretty nice if I'm stitching with my machine and I want to have precision binding. Does it take more time? Of course. If you want precision, it takes more time, right? If I don't care how it looks, I can do anything I want, do any old thing. But if I want precision, then this is one option to allow you to get a more precise look binding by machine. So anyway, let me flip my camera and I will say goodbye. I'll go back through the feed really quick. I don't have anybody monitoring with me right now, so it's just me. So what I'll do is I'll go back through the feed, and if there are questions that you need answered, I'll go ahead and answer them. And I hope you've enjoyed this. I know it took a little bit of a long time, but we went through several things. We went through how many feet do we have? We have lots of different feet with Janome that you can use, but why one might be better for different thickness of binding. I love AccuFeed, so you can always use AccuFeed, but it means then you need to create some kind of guide. So the cloth setter can always be used as the edge guide, no matter what foot you use, to give you that something to align on as you sew down your piece. And then we showed you how to turn the corner and get that really precise corner turn. And then we also went ahead and showed you how to join those tails and get that nice, perfectly flat look that's fully sewn in, that will work for any size binding. It's always the width of the binding that you're trimming, and then you're putting the 45-degree angle. And you can precisely adjust that. If it's a little big, or it's, start a little bigger and then take a little off. Always start with that full measure of the binding, and then if there's a little more flex in your fabric, that's when you'll take a little piece off of just one side in order to tighten up that binding just a little as you go. If you just tighten it up 1/8 at a time, you're not going to overshoot it. The fabric can accommodate that much no matter what. And then we showed you the options for securing it. I don't want pins when I do the flip like that, because pins will cause just a slight bump and a buckle. We want everything to lay flat, so as we're doing that stitch in the ditch or that top stitching, that everything is laying flat and smooth, and I can already precisely check how wide. I can even take this piece right here and I can put my ruler on it once it's secured with my Wonder Under or my glue or whatever. I can actually measure and make sure that it's accurate. So then if some areas are not as accurate, I can make that adjustment before I sew anything. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. And Janome, thanks for letting me be here and share this with people. We love our Janome family. Have a great day, you guys. Bye-bye.